Hi! Okay, so in this video I thought I'd take more of a look at poems and poetry, and specifically what I thought I'd do is have a little chat about, again, the magic of poetry. I thought I'd take a little look at the sais quoi, the sort of unknown magic of it. I thought I'd take a little look at that as well. I'm going to use a couple of poems as an example. I thought I'd talk a little bit about writer's block and whether that's for poems or for fiction writing. If you're struggling a little bit, then I thought I'd do a little bit on that as well. So if this video is for you, pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and we'll see how this goes. So firstly then, I thought just having a little chat about poems in general. If you're fairly new to poetry and say you've got to write one for an assignment or things like this, and maybe you're struggling, or maybe you're thinking of submitting a poem to a magazine or going in for a competition or something like that, and maybe you're just looking for some general ideas or thoughts. So I'm not going to go into any technicalities or anything like that. There's plenty of books out there that do. I'm going to look at things just a bit about the magic of the thing. And so with that in mind, and what inspired me to make this video is because I was looking to submit a poem the other day to a competition, and I was reading the guidelines, as you do. And the guidelines were, you know, think about the title, think about the originality of it and things like this. And it also included final point just saying, with that in mind, don't try to adhere too much to the rules because we're also looking for that je ne sais quoi. And we can't explain what that is in a concrete way, but we're looking for that too. And it just reminded me of that. If you're a bit rule oriented and you like to know where you are, and especially if you're a very logical person, because writing poems, you can have very logical, concrete poems, don't get me wrong, but you can also have much more, you know, creative, imaginative poems too. And you can't teach that. You can't give absolute advice on that because it's got to come from your heart. It's got to be something that you craft and comes from your heart. And yeah, I think for general tips as well, what she said about the title is important too. I think that can be a really good point. I don't always tend to bother too much with the title of the thing. But actually, if you're going in for a competition or if you are, you know, going to submit work to a magazine, having a bit of a quirky title can be a bit of a draw, can't it? And you don't want a title that's quirky just for its own sake, say, if you've got a very mundane poem. But having something that's a little bit different is perhaps not a bad idea. And I think that's a good little exercise to do as well. So when you've crafted your poem and you've put hours of work into it, into your first inspirational hit and then your drafts and your redrafts, have a little look at the title and then maybe have a play with some different titles and experiment a little bit and just see what lands, see what see what you actually feel could be a good thing there. And when it comes to writing a poem, there are no hard and fast rules these days. And that's a really good thing too. You can choose to have a particular form that you would adhere to. I think that's a good idea for discipline in general anyway. But unless you've been given a form, you can experiment a bit and you can play and see what works for you. And there's all sorts of different poems, aren't there? There's poems that sound really good. So if you're going to be speaking your poem, if you're going to a poetry event, for instance, you want to focus a bit perhaps on the sound of the thing and the rhythm of the thing and alliteration and consonants and assonance and things like this. But if you're having a poem that's just going to be published in a magazine, you might want to think just about imagery and a striking image and what that can do. And I think a really good example of that is one I've pulled up here, and it's by Ezra, and it's in a station of the metro. And it's the apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. And that's it. That is the poem. But isn't it striking? Immediately you're there. immediately you can see it, you can feel it, you know. So it doesn't have to be anything particularly fancy. Sometimes new poets can get a bit carried away. And I think as well with poetry, think about show, don't tell. That's something you'll hear a lot. If you do any writing courses, people always say, show, don't tell, show, don't tell. But there's a good reason for that, and especially with the poem. And what does it mean? It means don't describe the thing in itself. Give the image that will lead to a metaphor perhaps, or just give an image that's really arresting and it will do the work for you, or give a metaphor, you know. And here, of course, it's immediate. The immediacy of the poem, you know, it's just there. It's really, really good. And a great example, I think, of a poem that just sounds wonderful to read is this one. And it's called At the Crags at the Tooth. And it's from a guy called Anno Birkin. And there's a book called Who Said the Race Was Over. And yeah, I just came across this in a bookshop one day, and it's wonderful. And I'll read the poem out and you'll see what I mean about the idea of the rhythm and alliteration and things like this, because it's great. So it's called At the Crags at the Tooth. And it's by a chap called Anno Birkin, who is sadly no longer with us. A really young, precocious poet who, wrote some wonderful poems. And this is from a book called Who Said the Race Is Over? And I will read it out now. At the crags, at the tooth, where the rags of my youth lie, tattered and stone-washed, sloshed round the bowels of that truth that I knew, that she threw to the dogs and hyenas. She lured in the dreamer with silk and with song to the hilt of my wand, and she beckoned me on past the ruin of laughs that I knew in my head and my heart couldn't last, so begged for my last little breath to be drawn into her arms, in the calm of the murder she brought, to those days fraught with doubt, thick with cloud, shrouding peak and portcullis. But the gates of my bliss remained closed, till a girl wrapped in woes, in the throes of abandon, took warmly my hand, and we kissed and composed in the mists of our minds some eulogy, wistful and white, like the nights that I spent with no body beside me to bend about, dreaming in rhymes of reflection that I find in your face and your failings, losing my grip on the railings of faith as devoutly I rise from a dream without sleep, and I creep through my terminal twilight, away from the place where the sly might of melody moves us like wind, and we bend and we wind into things of one mind and one matter. You shatter the locks and the shackles come loose from my wrists and lie scattered in bits on the sand, where the jackals stand mad on hind legs at the edge of my circles of faith. I'm sorry my body is so young and so scared of the things that it wants most of all, like your hair on my stomach and your hands on my world. So yeah, that's Anno Birkin at the Crags at the Tooth. And what an extraordinary poem, hey? Really, really fabulous to read as well. Just glorious stuff. And it reminds us of the fun that poems can be as well. That glorious play with words, with the alliteration and consonants and assonance and the internal rhyming of the thing that drives it forward and forms the rhythm that comes so naturally when you read it. It's just brilliant and it's fun, and I think more people should know about this guy for a start, but it's a great reminder of what fun poems can be and how much fun you can have writing with them. They're great. It's a great exercise anyway in writing. I think it's really good to do. So there's that. So yeah, have a bit of fun experimenting with different forms and different styles, and read it aloud. Read your poem aloud as well, and think about things like the imagery and metaphor and things like this. And if you're struggling to come up with metaphors, or just let your mind go, let yourself play a little bit and try and think of things that are a bit unusual as well. Be wary of cliches, especially nowadays. So many things have been done before. So if you're coming up with a poem, have a little think about, you know, the pitfalls to avoid, the cliches, especially when writing similes and metaphors and things like this. Try and come up with something a bit different, a bit unusual. But that said, perhaps not so different or so unusual that it just sounds weird. And if you're reading it, you can't get past it because it's such a strange image that it takes you away from the rest of the poem. So just try and play a little bit and have a little bit of fun. I think there's also the myth of the lone poet, isn't there? There's this idea of the lone genius. And when you think about that, you think about the romantic poets and people like Keats, Byron and Shelley and people like this. But remember that they too collaborated. There was no lone genius born, you know, in isolation. There was an awful lot of collaboration going on behind the scenes. And I think Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a really good example of this. You know, she went off into the Alps or wherever they went, spent some time there with Percy Bysshe Shelley, and I think Lord Byron was there as well, you know, as you do, hanging out, writing stories with your mates, and she produces this banger of a book, this absolutely sensational book, Frankenstein. I mean, my God, right? It's an incredible book, seriously. And I love the fact that she produces it. I love the fact that they're all there together. What a cool crowd to hang out with. But again, the idea that things are just produced in isolation, it isn't true. So if you have an inner critic and your inner critic is trying to say to you, oh, this isn't good enough, da 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 da, whatever it is that your inner critic's doing, remind it that it takes an awful lot of work, an awful lot of years sometimes for writers to get noticed and to hone their craft. You know, Stephen King wrote a book ages ago called On Writing, where he just talks about the craft of the thing. And he says if you want to be a writer, write a lot and read a lot. You know, you have to read an awful lot to get a sense of story, to get a sense of what works. And the same with poetry, you know, and you have to write a lot to get a sense of your own voice, to hone your craft, to get better. You know, I mean, I'm coming up to nearly 50 now. But when I started out writing, I've been writing on and off for years and years and years. And I dug up the other day on my computer, I dug up a load of writing that I did in my 20s and my 30s. And it's, you know, I would consider it juvenilia. I would say a lot of it was really a lot about love and all sorts of things that I just wouldn't write about in the same way now because I'm older now. So I'm not necessarily dismissing it all because I was young. But you come to different places in your life and you want to write about different things, and you come to the same point in your life with a different perspective, you know, like a spiral path kind of thing. We all go and we all have all of these things all of these lessons that we live, I guess. And you have the same lesson maybe when you're older, life lessons. But you look at it through different eyes, different perspective. I guess that's what I'm trying to say here. So some of it was a bit not very good. So I got rid of an awful lot of it actually. And I kept some of it. Some of it was quite good. Some of it was just a bit self-indulgent. So I got rid of all that and so on and so forth. But it takes time. It just takes time. And different times for different people, right? Some people might write a masterpiece at 20, other people might write a masterpiece at 60. You never know. So don't get too precious about your writing. That is to say, don't allow your inner critic to stifle you. Don't imagine that if you're not some sort of genius, therefore you shouldn't write or anything like that. Some people just compare themselves to other people, and especially if you're at uni or if you're in a competitive environment, and then it can be very easy to perhaps get a bit insecure or think, oh my God, is this good enough? Da 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 da. You've got to find your own voice, and you've got to be able to stand tall and be happy with what you're writing, and know that it isn't for everyone. It isn't going to be for everyone, you know. So you're probably going to face some criticism from people, and that's okay. That doesn't necessarily mean your work is bad. you have to have confidence and faith in it, no matter what. You know, if it really is bad, I'm sure someone will let you know in a constructive way, that is to say as well. But probably if you're writing, the chances are that you have some idea anyway as to, you know, what works and what doesn't work. But look out for the people out there, the trolls, who will try and tear you down no matter what, because they're just out there, unfortunately, you know, and you have to just flick that off, pay that no mind. Listen to the constructive feedback only, take that on board if you can. So yeah, so a couple of different poems there, and just a reminder as to how arresting imagery can be, and you can have some fun with that as well. It is a fun exercise in some regards, writing poetry, I think, because it really does get you to explore your imagination, to explore imagery, to explore metaphor, and all of these devices that make a poem. So it can be really good fun. So if you're coming to a poem and you're like, oh God, I've got to write a poem, maybe maybe you're at uni or something like this, you've got to write one, and maybe you're a bit intimidated by the form of the thing. Don't be intimidated. There are a lot of snobs out there as well, of course. Poetry is the most snobbish thing when it comes to writing. We all know it. There are hierarchies. There's very intellectual poetry out there that's, you know, it's certainly beyond me. And I don't try and write it, and I don't pretend to understand it, and I let other people appreciate that. You know, that's great, and that's their thing. But poetry is not this impenetrable thing. It is an accessible form, and it can be accessible for everyone, and it should be accessible for everyone. You know, it's got hierarchies within it, that's fine. That doesn't belittle what you want to write. So bear that in mind as well, because, you know, it's a difficult world. It's a competitive world, and you'll always find hierarchies everywhere. I remember when I went to uni, and one of my tutors at uni, although she was a tutor, and I thought that's really cool, she herself was stuck in this position of hierarchy and wanting to do better and be better because she wanted to be seen as, you know, more cool. And so she had the level of competitiveness still. You know, you imagine it might stop at some point. I thought, right, you know, getting a degree, that's cool. Then you think the competitiveness might sort of stop to some degree, but of course it doesn't. It goes on, and it goes on and on and on. And if you become a tutor, it's still there. You're still measuring yourself against other people. You're still in this hierarchy of this situation where, you know, someone else has got 3 degrees, or they've got, you know, the PhD, and so you want to get your PhD, and then, you know, even then, does it ever stop? Do people ever stop judging themselves as well? I don't know. Probably not. So there we are. So if you're a bit stuck, play with the thing and have some fun. Try and make it a fun exercise. And I recommend watching the film Dead Poets Society as well, to that end, with Robin Williams. I don't know if I mentioned that in my last video as well, I might have done. But it's just a very good film, and it reminds us of the passion and the excitement and the wonder and the fun of the poem, and how much fun it is to speak them aloud as well. So maybe have a little look if you're interested in poetry, and maybe, you know, have a little look and see if you've got any poetry events nearby where you can just speak them out, or online as well, because that's great. It's great to get the feedback, and it's great to have a bit of fun, and it's, you know, it's just a good all-round exercise, I'd say. And even if you're shy, and especially if you're shy, definitely, it's great to kick yourself out of a comfort zone every now and again. Hey, so that's that. And I thought as well, I'd talk a little bit about the magic of the poem. So I talked about this a little bit in my last video as well. Poetry, to me, a great poem, any work of art, is an alchemical process. That is to say, you read the thing and then it changes you. You're not the same person afterwards. You know, especially if you're hit with something a bit arresting and a bit beautiful and a bit sublime. And actually, to this end, I'm just going to bring up very quickly, if I can find it, Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. So yeah, that's another poem that really speaks to me. I think it's so beautiful and I think it's absolutely true. And that's just an example of when a poem can just really move you as well. And just reminds you, again, of something bigger than the small minutiae of our lives. Because life often gets you very caught up in it, very caught up in your day-to-day. And poems are a way of zooming out a little bit and looking at things from a larger perspective sometimes as well. And just reminding ourselves of a wild element to it all too in this poem, which I absolutely love. So yeah, an alchemical process, I think. And like I say, any work of art is, if you look at an exquisite painting, if you look at a Turner painting, for example, something like that, and the power of it can absolutely fill you again with that sort of sense of the sublime. Really extraordinary stuff. So, have some fun. Have fun with it. If you're struggling, you know, let loose a bit with the morning pages. See if that frees you up in whatever medium you're writing in. Have fun with experimentation. Try different forms. I wrote a Villanelle the other day and it was really good fun to write. Actually, I might see if I can bring that up. See if we can find that. Going to be a few edits in this because digging around for various poems, I'm just editing those out and creating new bits of video to stick together. So here we go. So the Villanelle, here's a good example of a famous Villanelle by Sylvia Plath. And you can't talk about poetry without mentioning Sylvia Plath a little bit, right? Because Sylvia Plath. So she had some fun with the Villanelle form with Mad Girl's Love Song. And it's this. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I lift my lids and all is born again. I think I made you up inside my head. The stars go waltzing out in blue and red. An arbitrary blackness gallops in. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I dreamed that you bewitched me into bed and sung me moonstruck, kissed me quite insane. I think I made you up inside my head. God topples from the sky, hell's fires fade, exit seraphim and Satan's men. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I fancied you'd return the way you said, but I grow old and I forget your name. I think I made you up inside my head. I should have loved a thunderbird instead. At least when spring comes they roar back again. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I think I made you up inside my head. So that's Sylvia Plath. And then I had some fun with this form because we had a brief. Every now and again, I haven't been there for ages actually, but Rattle magazine do a sort of, I was going to say a Friday night, but I think it's more a sort of Sunday, Monday night poetry reading where you can just read various poems and they do a prompt. And you can either follow the prompt or you can come up with your own. And they had a prompt and it was a Villanelle, I believe, with a cryptid or some sort of wild animal type of thing. Yeah, what an amazing prompt, right? So anyway, so I wrote this. The Beast of Bodmin Moor, Villanelle style. White yellow eyes, stealthy black paw. She pads over windswept crags at dusk. She's the beast of Bodmin Moor. A mournful cry atop a tour turns any wanderers to a husk. White yellow eyes, stealthy black paw. Is she looking for a mate or claw? Rippling fur, soft shadowed puss. She's the beast of Bodmin Moor. Dark whispers of her in folklore, by firelight, arabesque sparks and gusts, white yellow eyes, stealthy black paw. Black as obsidian, Panthera raw, the ghost of the forest, she weaves and ironks. She's the beast of Bodmin Moor. She's not a monster, just a playful outlaw, crunching sheep bones with fangs or tusk. White yellow eyes, stealthy black paw. She's the beast of Bodmin Moor. So yeah, I just wrote that, and it's great fun. And again, with Halloween coming up as well, you can have a bit of fun with poetry, because Villanelle and things like that can lend themselves really well, I think, to a Halloween-esque theme. And of course, you've got The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, and what more Halloween poem can you want? A really great fun poem that is, and I recommend reading that around candlelight. We're safe, of course, but I love poems that can just make you feel a bit spooky and things like this. And candlelight is another way to make us feel a little bit unsettled or a little bit uneasy, isn't it? When you come in at night and you switch your electric lights on and it floods your house with this comforting light, we forget about the things of the shadows, and we forget about the spirit world, and we forget about things that are slightly unsettling and uneasy that may or may not exist. I happen to believe the spirit world does very much exist. So I think lighting candles is a great way to invite in that sense of wonder again, and a sense of the sort of dark sublime, as it were, a sense of unease and being a bit unsettled because you see the dancing, leaping shadows and you start to fancy that maybe there are ghosts in the corner and things like this. It's great fun. So yeah. So I think just have a bit of fun with it, and explore different types of poetry, read as much as you can. With the internet as well, of course, you've got every poem pretty much ever written at your fingertips, every famous poem that is, and have a bit of fun and have a bit of experimentation. Don't be afraid to fail. You know, that's one of the reasons people's inner critic prevents them from writing, because they're afraid to fail. Never be afraid to fail. Never be afraid to fail. Be as experimental as you like. If you're a weird poet and you like writing about strange things, go for it. You know, someone out there will appreciate it. Seriously. I myself write some quite odd poems sometimes. I love a bit of surrealism. I love a bit of sci-fi, a bit of fantasy, things like that. So I write poems like that as well. You've got to write what moves you, and you've got to find out what that is. You've got to, you know, mine your world for information. And I think as well, that said, I can't remember who said it now, and it might have been Stephen King actually. Not Stephen King, it might have been Steven Spielberg, because you think about Steven Spielberg's films, about their fantastical films, right? They're all about all sorts of things. Some of them are about the sci-fi elements. If you think about Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T. and things like this. But what he makes a point of, I think he said this of his own films, is that they're still films about family. They're still exploring the familiar themes of, you know, love and companionship and friendship and forming bonds and all of these sort of things. He just chooses to use sometimes these fantastical elements. So write what you know. When people say to you, that's another thing people will always say. They say, write what you know. But you can apply what you know to things that you don't know. You know, chances are not many people will have had encounters with an ET. But you can apply what you know to fashion a story as to how you might respond under those circumstances, right? Because we're human and we have these similar ways that we respond and we behave. And to be a writer, to have imagination, all you're doing is conjuring these ideas, these well-worn themes of love, companionship, friendship, all of this. And we're applying it to our everyday life. We're applying it to the world around us. We're applying it to the story. We can do nothing else but bring that human element to the story. So you can be writing about something as fantastical as hell, it doesn't matter. But you're still applying the same themes to it, you know? You're still going to be having friendships in space, for example. You know, that's kind of what's meant, I believe, by write what you know. So don't think you must abandon the sci-fi or abandon the fantasy or God knows what else. You just bring you and what you know of the world to those elements, to those things. So yeah. So I know I've rambled on a bit and I've made this all a bit all over the place, but I hope that it helps somebody. I hope someone gets a bit of inspiration and maybe picks up Julia Cameron's idea of morning pages and maybe has a look at her book. And yeah, I wish you well. I wish you well with any poetry writing venture. I think even if you're not a poet and you fancy writing a bit of poetry, I just recommend it anyway, because as I say, it can be enormous fun. And I certainly enjoy it a lot. So yeah, I hope you've got something from this video. And I wish you well. And I hope you have a really great weekend. All right then, take care. Bye.